Now here's the evidence. Here's the research. I told you I'm gonna give you a little bit of evidence, but not too much. In terms of the evidence, the umbrella of the large area of visual support strategies has been identified as an evidence-based practice. And it's been identified as an evidence-based practice based on a review of many studies, high-quality studies that meet a certain criteria. Now, one of the groups, the National Professional Center on ASD, they conducted a review, and they determined, based on all of the research, that visual support strategies are an evidence-based intervention for individuals ages 3 to 22. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're supporting a person who's 23, you shouldn't use visuals. All that means is that research has been done with individuals up to the age of 22, right? So, professional judgment. If it works with a 22-year-old, it'll probably work with someone who's 23 or possibly even 43, right? So that's just about what do we have documented evidence for. We also have documented evidence to support the use of visual strategies for a variety of skills, including social, communication and behavior skills, school readiness, helping young children be prepared to go into school, play skills, cognitive skills, right? You're learning kinds of skills, motor skills, adaptive skills, that means daily living kinds of things, and academics. So the literature is relatively rich in terms of the kind of research that's been done in the use of visual support strategies for a variety of individuals, okay? So if you're really interested in looking at the information from the National Professional Center on ASD, you can Google them, and not only do they have their nice little report that says here are all of the evidence-based interventions for autism, on the same website they also have some very nice learning modules on different intervention approaches. I'm also going to point you out to another set of modules later today that you can access online. So there's, say, a module on visual support strategies, and you can do the learning content, and they have little checklists to help you learn how to implement things. So there have been some really useful tools developed to help people like you implement evidence-based practices in whatever setting you're in. Okay, so the National Professional Center on ASD is a great resource. So you can go home and Google them. Okay, the other thing that's really important to think about in terms of visual supports is the idea of how are we going to represent information, all right? So there is no one right kind of visual, right? Symbols from Boardmaker are not the only kind of visual representation. They're one way of representing information, but there are lots of different ways. So it's really important that we think about an individual's strengths and needs and match the kinds of visuals and the kinds of supports that we're using to that person. Okay, so commonly we're thinking about objects. We might use real objects, photographs, some sort of graphic symbol. The symbols from Boardmaker are graphic symbols, or text. So let me kind of show you some examples of what these things look like. So these are objects, object cues, or you might hear them called tangible symbols or tactile symbols. These are three-dimensional tactile items, and they represent things, activities, people, places, and so on. Okay? They're often used by individuals who are blind or deafblind, right? Or blind who have autism, or blind who have Down syndrome, or, right? Who require information that's like a visual support, but because they can't see, we need to do something else, right? So they need to rely on what they can feel. So you can see in this picture up here, for example, here's a card, and it's got the squished top half of a pop can, and that's for recycling. Right, and they've glued it to a card. They've written the word on recycle, or the word recycle on the card. Now that's not necessarily for the individual, especially if the individual is not sighted. That's for the adult to make sure that the adult knows the cue word that's associated, right? So that every time anybody were to present that cue to the child, they all say the same word. And so that the individual starts to learn that, oh, this word means this thing, right? But they're going to rely on this tactile information to understand that concept. Here's an example of a choice board that has a number of tactile items. So there's the toy microphone that you can talk into and it makes noises. There's a cup, a ball, a bubble wand, and a balloon. So that an individual can learn to feel a number of choices available and make a selection, right? So when we talk about object cues, those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. Here are some more examples. This is a schedule board that has a number of items sequenced and they're object cues. Here's another example. This is a little toy sock and the wording here, it says, chore, put clothes away, right? So when you have a little sock on the card, that means you're putting your clothes away. This one says water plants and it's got a little piece of dried plant on the card, okay? This is swing. It's pretty clever. It's a little piece of chain with a little piece of rubber on it so it feels like the actual swing. And this is dismissal, and I know it's hard for you to see, but it's, you know, the little strap on a backpack with the little clip? That's what it is. That's attached to the card. So if you're ever working with somebody who has a significant visual impairment, who has other developmental disabilities, you are more than likely going to need to use object cues. Also, if you're working with an individual with autism or developmental disability who is quite significantly affected in terms of their ability to understand information, you might also, for a sighted child, be using object cues. So I'm going to introduce you in video to a young man today who used to be 5 when I met him, and now he's in his 20s, and he's 6.5 feet tall. But he started with object cues. Now he's a sighted individual, he can see, but he did not understand photographs and he did not understand graphic symbols. He understood 3-dimensional real things. And so that's what we had to use for him initially, okay? If you're ever working with somebody who requires object cues, the very best place to go to try and think about what should I use, places like the Perkins School for the Blind. Right? Look at the deaf-blind resources. You Google deaf-blind object cues and you'll find lists of ideas, because this is what people who teach individuals who are deaf-blind, they do this. This is what they do for their kids, because all of their kids require visual supports that are tactile in nature. So they've done a lot of the thinking for you already. In a little bit, I'm going to give you a bit of a talk with your neighbor challenge, and I'm going to get you to try and think about what you might use for object cues, and it's not always as straightforward as you might think, so that's coming up. But those are what object cues, that's what we mean by objects, okay? And some people, even sighted people, might require those, just based on their level of understanding. Some individuals are going to use photographs. Right, so just photos of whatever the items are. So this, I don't think, is a new idea to anyone here. But here's a picture of the cooked chicken. I've got a student. This is his favorite meal, right? We'll pretend his name is Fred. We call it the Fred Special, right? Because that's what he loves. Here's a picture of Marble Run. So they're just photographs. Way easier to come by now that we can take digital photos, take good digital photos, or find photos online. We'll come back to and talk about where do you find really good photos, because that's also important, right? A blurry photo where there's a Marble Run and 12 other toys in the background is not a good photo for Marble Run, right? So we have to think about those things too. We've also got graphic symbols. So how many of you are familiar with these kind, picture communication symbols, a la Boardmaker? Right? Okay, so these are called picture communication symbols, or PCS. This is another kind of symbol called symbol sticks. They look almost like the Boardmaker ones, just close enough, right? But not quite the same, so they're safe, right? They're not going to get in trouble for copying the Mayor Johnson Boardmaker symbols, but they're pretty darn close. So those are symbol sticks, and I'm going to talk about where you can get those. The widget symbols are the ones on your far right. They're used more in the UK. These are just 3 examples of brands, right? So these line drawing symbols, there are many different brands of symbols. Mostly in these parts, we're using picture communication symbols a la Boardmaker, because Boardmaker was really the first piece of robust software that was out kind of from like the late 80s, early 90s, where you can type in a word into the computer and it pops up a symbol. So most schools have board makers, most early intervention places are using board maker, community support agencies supporting adults are often using board maker, families buy board maker. So board maker is pretty well known. This is the point in the talk where I have to follow Pat, Brenda, in our mission. We have a mission. It's one of our missions. One of our missions is to make sure that individuals do not call these things here PECs, because these things here are not PECs. They're not PECs. I can tell you why in a second. But people often call these things PECs, and sometimes I'll get called to go consult with a child, and when I'm taking down the information, what does the child use for supports? What kinds of supports does the kid have? Oh, he uses PECs. So I'm thinking one thing, I'm thinking PECs, the picture exchange communication system, and then I arrive and they say, oh, here's his PECs. And I see a visual schedule with some symbols, right? PECs isn't what the child is using. The child is using picture communication symbols in a visual schedule, but that's not PECs. So let me explain the difference for you. Graphic symbols, picture communication symbols, or PCS, you can see the confusion between PCS and PECs, right? PCS is the brand name of this symbol. That's a PCS. It's not a PEC. It's also not a PIC or a PIC-SIM. PIC-SIMs are a different brand of symbol. It's an old brand from the 70s. Most people don't use it anymore, but it's another brand. Okay, so these are all brands. Picture communication symbols, symbol sticks, widget symbols, PIC-SIMs. Those are all brands of symbols. PECs stands for the Picture Exchange Communication System. It is a manualized intervention program that you can use with objects or photos or picture communication symbols or symbol sticks or the PECs people's own brand of symbols called Pics for PECs. Right? So PECs is not the same as the image. So now you guys will never call these PECs anymore, right? Everybody raise your right hand. I do hereby solemnly swear never to, right? And you will go home and tell your friends, and you will go to work and you will tell your coworkers, so that we're all using the language and the terminology correctly, so that when people say they're doing PECs, they're actually doing PECs. Makes it way easier for those of us who are trying to come in and figure out what's going on, right? So PECs means you're implementing this particular manualized program, which we will spend some time talking about. If you're using the board maker symbols, call them the board maker symbols, call them PCS, just call them symbols. I don't really care, right? Board maker probably would like you to call them PCSs, but they're symbols, right? Symbols are not the same as PECs. Okay, so we've all got that now. I can go back and say to Pat, I've done the PECs lecture again. Another group of people now know. We figure if we do this long enough, people will understand. So that's our mission, okay? So now with all of those different kinds of symbols, we've got lots of choices. So it's important that we recognize individual people will require different symbols, right? Not all people are created equally, right? Not all symbol sets are created equally in the eyes of the person who needs to use them. So some individuals are going to require objects. They're a bit more of a pain in the butt, right? Because you have to like gather up objects and stuff. It's not as easy as, typing a word into Board Maker and poof, there's the picture, right? It takes a bit more work with object cues and you have to like carry them around and stuff. But if that's the only thing that the student understands, that's what you should be using. Right? There's no point in showing a kid a graphic symbol if he doesn't understand the graphic symbol. Come on, we're going shopping now, and I show him a picture of something that he has no idea what it means. I'm not really helping him very much, right? If all he understands is objects, then that's where I need to start. I'm gonna work on moving him somewhere else, but if what he understands today is objects, then we're gonna need to make objects his system. Some individuals will use photographs, maybe color, maybe black and white. Some individuals actually have more difficulty with color. Like color adds just another layer to them of stuff that they've got to try to figure out. So again, that's something that you need to think about. Graphic symbols, also you can have symbols in color or symbols in black and white. And I've worked with individuals where, you know, the colored symbols from Boardmaker, they're so beautiful looking. They do take a bit of ink, but they're really beautiful looking. And I've had a student, when he was little, if I put a color symbol in front of him with all those beautiful colors, he got lost in the color, right? And he couldn't see the actual representation, he just enjoyed the color. And so the symbol didn't mean anything to him, right? But if I gave him a black and white symbol, he understood what it meant. So this is very individualized, right? And then for some people, text. If a person can read, for crying out loud, right? Text. It's also a lot less work, right? Some people are gonna begin perhaps, you know, at the object level or maybe with photographs, and they might move their way down to text. Some people might use graphic symbols their entire lives, right? Some people might use more than one. Some people might use photos for some things and graphic symbols for other things. That's also okay. What's important to understand is that we're talking about individuals here, and our goal is to make information accessible to them, right? This is about making information accessible. So if I want to make information accessible, I need to use a format that the person does indeed understand, okay?